tonight's rising star, Rishi Sunak, will be listening to Mr Farage, but he's also the man in charge of spending commitments, and he's got some questions to answer this morning about those. Upsetting them both, the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, promising the most radical Labour agenda ever. But what does that mean for business and taxpayers? A new adaptation of Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials begins this evening on BBC One. I've been talking to its star, Ruth Wilson, about demons, magic, and why these stories are for all ages.
Have you ever seen an armoured bear? Or tartars?
Well, I've negotiated with bears. It's much more tiresome than it sounds. I've fought tartars, and that can actually be quite fun.
Reviewing a busy morning's news, Anushka Astana from The Guardian and Jane Moore from The Sun. All of that after the news this morning with Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. With just over 5 weeks to go until the general election, both Labour and the Conservatives are making big spending pledges. The government has announced that benefits, including job seekers' allowance and universal credit, will rise from next April. The decision ends a freeze which has been in place since 2016. It is the latest in a series of spending pledges made by Boris Johnson, who's promised more money for the NHS, schools and police officers. Meanwhile, Labour says that it will insulate millions of homes across the UK and fit them with renewable sources of power. The party says that its plan will cut carbon emissions and create hundreds of thousands of jobs. The Liberal Democrats have formally complained after ITV said that its head-to-head election debate would only include Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. The party said its leader, Jo Swinson, should also appear in the debate later this month. They claim that her absence risks misrepresenting the current political reality. ITV says that it intends to offer viewers balanced election coverage. The Vietnamese community in London is holding vigils this weekend in memory of the 39 people found dead in a lorry in Essex. A service last night was attended by more than 100 people. More are expected to pay their respects at a memorial today. Authorities in the UK and Hanoi are still trying to establish the identities of the victims. The authorities in Saudi Arabia have given the go-ahead for the flotation of part of the state-owned oil company Aramco, with the aim of raising billions of dollars for the kingdom. Business sources say that 1 or 2% of the shares in Aramco will go on sale initially. The whole company is thought to be worth more than $1.5 trillion. And finally, an oven is being delivered to the International Space Station so astronauts can bake chocolate chip cookies. A craft containing a specially designed space oven took off from the US state of Virginia on Saturday. Astronauts will test the impact of high heat and zero gravity on the consistency of the biscuits. The taste, I'm sure, will be out of this world. That's it from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Andrew, back to you.
Many thanks for that, Roger. Now, front pages of the newspapers generally, lots of politics, lots of rugby. There's the Sunday Times. Double trouble for Boris, it says, after Corbyn bounced. The Labour Party are moving up in the polls at the moment, it says. It's also got a story about its rival, Trump guru, that's Steve Bannon, the controversial right-wing American, is eyeing buying the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph. He apparently thinks they're not right-wing enough. On cue, they're doing their best. Jews will leave if Corbyn wins, it says. A very stunning story, except the quote actually comes from the chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, let's move on to the Observer. Tories act to prevent NHS crisis hitting poll hopes. That was essentially the story you were hearing in the news. More spending on the NHS as the election campaign gets going. More spending absolutely everywhere. Boris Johnson has given an interview to the Sunday Express and another exclusive interview remarkably similarly to The Sun on Sunday. But you get the sort of sense of the division at the heart of Brexit Britain from this newspaper, because you've got the Sunday Express front page, Boris, I will get Brexit all wrapped up by Christmas, he's saying, hopes to do it by Christmas. And then you turn the page and what do you see? A double-page advert from Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party saying Boris's deal is not Brexit. We'll be talking about that later in the programme at some length, I'm sure. The Mail has a totally different story about some faked oil paintings, it says, that are in Dumfries House, which has been run and a big centrepiece for Prince Charles over the years. And then I think that's enough of all of those. So let's start. I think we're starting with Jane, are we?
Yes.
Good.
Well, as you say,
right.
the battle lines have been drawn between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, not least with the Sunday Express Splash with Boris, exclusive. Did he know that Farage was taking out a double-page spread ad on the next page? I'm not sure, but
no.
They are funny bedfellows. And also here in the Telegraph, the Tories, Sunday Times, the Tories have offered to make me appear twice. I won't be bought off with baubles. That's Nigel Farage saying that he was offered a peerage. And he's not going to stand down from this. He's not going to play ball. And you know, it's interesting because obviously, you know, a lot of people, whatever you think of his politics, Farage is probably one of the most important politicians of the modern age.
The single figure in the country most associated with Brexit.
Yes.
He's, for a lot of people, Mr. Brexit.
But he's always been the outsider. Even, you know, with Dominic Cummings and the Vote Leave lot, they kind of elbowed him to one side, felt that he didn't play out well with the middle classes. And here we are again. I think he kind of, I don't know, he seems to me like he wants to be an insider. I always thought he had his charm, which was that he was a maverick, an outsider. He wasn't bothered about power, per se. Now it looks like he wants to be in the inside, the A-team, and they're still saying, we don't want you. And maybe there's a bit of that wrapped up in this.
And as ever, there are signs of strains inside the Brexit party.
Yeah, although I just think it's interesting you say he didn't want to be an insider. He has tried quite a few times to be an insider. I think, is it 8 times, trying to be an MP? But this is really interesting because Nigel Farage disagrees with this, with his very old friend, Aaron Banks, who has been a donor previously to him. Aaron Banks is just as ardent over Brexit as Nigel Farage, and he's just as critical of Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. But he says that Farage is being very dog in the manger about this and that there's no point in kind of going really hell for leather for seats if you don't think you're going to win. He suggests that could actually split the vote and let the Lib Dems through in some places. And Banks' basic thesis is let this go through, get a majority for Boris Johnson, and then let's have the argument over the trade
hard Brexit
deal. Exactly. And I think it's really important because whether ardent Brexiteers who are voting in this election do a Nigel or do an Aaron Banks is going to be quite important to how this election goes.
It's anything but the Tories vote, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the Labour heartlands would go anything but the Tories, which is where Brexit comes in, the Brexit party. So, you know, I do think it's going to be a big problem. And
I read this week that Labour think that if the Brexit party stands in every seat across Great Britain, then that will gift Labour another 40 seats. So it could be the result of the election could hang on what Nigel Farage decides to do this morning, folks.
Well, it's one of a number of things that makes this really unpredictable. As you said, you've been covering elections since 1983.
I'm very old.
Yeah. You never think that one has been as unpredictable as this. And just an example on the front page of the Sunday Times, double trouble for Boris after Corbyn bounce. I mean, their poll shows that Corbyn has gone up by 6 points in a few days. And look how different the polls are. The Tories have a lead of 8, 12, 16 in different polls. And even though those are all Tory leads, what you're talking about, the fact that the Brexit party will be important in some seats, the kind of Lib Dem surge, which could actually hurt Boris Johnson and affect his majority just as easily as a Labour surge, shows how unpredictable this is going to be.
And then there's Scotland, of course, where the predictions range from the Tories losing 2 or 3 seats to the Tories losing all of their seats in Scotland. So that's going to be really interesting as well. The Boris Johnson interview, let's talk a little bit about what he actually says.
Yes, well, you mentioned, of course, so the Sun on Sunday have their Boris Johnson exclusive here with the political editor David Wooding. It reads verbatim, actually, with the Sunday Express.
Why don't you do the Sun and I'll do the Express?
I'm trying to figure out whether or not they're in the same room. I'm assuming they would have been.
Or Boris Johnson has the same lines.
But what I love is Jeremy Corbyn is and we've had a debate about this, so coeliacanth, we think, as in celiac.
I always thought coeliacanth. This is the elderly fish from the bottom of the Mariana Trench, I now know.
A rare, large, foul-tasting fish more than 100 million years older than the first dinosaurs. And, you know, it's a classic case of Boris's colourful,
rather offensively,
classic education.
The coeliacanth to Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, but it's verbatim in the Sun as well.
Yes, so here is the Prime Minister in an exclusive interview in the Sunday Express talking about his deal. He says, you could put it in at gas mark for 20 minutes and Bob's your uncle. Here he is in an exclusive interview with the Sun on Sunday. He says, we've just got to put it in at gas mark 4. Give it 20 minutes and Bob's your uncle. And so it goes. It's very, very similar. And he's saying that, vote for Farage, you get Jeremy Corbyn. That's going to be a key message of his.